Hi and welcome back to my channel. My name is Erica. Today is the first in a series of 3 beginner cross stitch videos. I'm going to show you everything you need to know in order to be able to participate in our 12 days of stitchy ornaments. You can see some of the fun ornaments on the tree right here behind me, and throughout this series we are going to be stitching this adorable joy ornament. This is so cute and fun, and don't worry, it's totally beginner friendly, so I'm going to show you everything you need to know to be able to join in on our fun stitch along. Today we're going to be talking all about my favorite supplies, so if you're ready to get started, let's dive right in. Okay, so here are some of my favorite supplies. Now, one of my favorite things about cross stitch is it can be really affordable depending on how, much you want to get into it. I'm going to share some of my basic things that I love and I use all the time, and then I'm going to show you the difference between some of the flosses and how I store them. So let's just take a quick look at my little stitchy ornament here. This is one of the ornaments from my 12 days of cross stitch, and the reason I'm doing this video so that you guys can have confidence to join in on this fun stitch along. This is going to be starting December 1st, but of course you can just do this at your own pace as well. We're going to be stitching one ornament every other day, so you'll have 2 days to stitch each ornament. And how I finished these, and this is totally optional, you can actually do whatever you like, but I went ahead and put them in these cute little embroidery hoops, and then I just stuck a little ribbon on top, and then I put them on my tree back here, and it's just such a fun decoration to have it in my sewing room. And I also put the 12 days of quilty ornaments on there as well. If you're not familiar with that, I will make sure to link that below. We're going to be doing that sew along in the month of December as well. So on one day we're going to do a quilty ornament, the next day we're going to do a stitchy ornament, and that way hopefully everybody can participate. I think it's just going to be so much fun. Now I will also put information on what you're going to need for the 12 days of stitchy ornaments below this video, so make sure to click the show more link. All that information will be there. I will also include a link to the ribbon that I got, and I'll put a link to these cute little embroidery hoops as well, because I just think it's such a fun way to finish off these ornaments. So this is what they look like. There are 12 of them, and I think they're just such a fun decoration for my little tree over here in my sewing room. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the supplies I used to make this ornament and what you would need just to get started cross stitching. So basic supplies are going to be super simple. You're obviously going to need some needles, and there are a variety of needles out there. These Pat's favorite needle in size 26 is my favorite. Now you can just do a simple Google search for your fabric size, and it will tell you what needle size to go with your fabric. I've kind of found that I like these sort of no matter what fabric I've been using, but I'm also kind of sticking to the larger fabrics just because I can't see those really tiny, smaller fabrics. So Pat Carson size 26 needles are my favorite. I've also used the DMC needles. There's other brands out there. These are just my favorite. They're a little bit shorter, and in my opinion, they're just a little bit easier to stitch with. But you are going to need some needles, and as a beginner, I'm going to recommend size 26 in whatever brand you go for. And then this is just a little nice to have that go with my needles, but this is just a cute little magnetic needle keeper, and this is from Fat Quarter Shop. I will link it below, and it's got my current needle that I'm using in there on it. And they sell them in different colors, and I've seen people put a different size needle in each one, and then they just mark on the back what size needles they keep in here. But they're magnetic, and so they just keep your needles for you, and so they're just super handy. This is totally optional, just a nice to have. You don't have to have one of those. A lot of times I will actually just keep my needle tucked in my fabric, and so you don't really have to have one of these. They're just kind of fun. Another product that I've been recently using more of are these little thimbles. Now, if you do a lot of stitching, when I stitch, I actually push my needle through with this part of my finger right here. I was trying to get all these ornaments done in time for the sew along, and I was getting a little hole in my finger right here, and so these are actually reusable, and you can just peel them off here. They're just sticky, and then you can just stick them on your finger just right wherever you need them, and then that way you can kind of use them. They're just like a little leather kind of thimble. I don't think they're actually leather, but I'll put a link to these particular ones, and then when I'm done stitching, I just put it back on here. Sometimes I'll put my used one right here on the corner of my needle case. That way I know that's the one I'm kind of using at the time. And you can just use them until they kind of wear out or the sticky falls off, and then you can grab another one. So those are kind of nice to have. My next favorite item are these scissors. Now these are Omni Grid scissors. They are super duper sharp, and they have just a really nice point on them. You can use, of course, any small kind of scissors that you want. You just want something that has a really nice point on it so you can just get into those little areas. When you're snipping off threads, you can snip off the thread and not anything else around it. So these are my favorite go-tos for that. The next thing that you're going to need, of course, is some fabric. Now this is just some plain 14 count Aida, and the count stitches when I first started were a little bit confusing. I didn't understand what they were. So when something says 14 count, it means that there are 14 little holes going across for every 1 inch. If it's 28 count, it means there are 28 holes across in 1 inch. So a lot of times for those higher count fabrics, you're actually going to stitch over 2 squares, and that's kind of a more advanced technique. I don't recommend it if you're just starting out because it can get kind of confusing. So I like to start out with a 14 count. The holes are nice and big, they're easy to see. I do have to wear my readers in order to do that, and I usually have make sure I have adequate lighting as well so that I can see the holes. And this is just plain white fabric. I actually purchased this off Amazon. You can get it virtually anywhere, and it comes in a variety of colors, and it's just called 14 count Aida. This next item is just a total like optional extra, kind of like to have it. So these are called line keepers. These are from Fat Quarter Shop, and they are magnetic little strips here, and I'll pull one off so you can see them. And they just open up just like this, and you can place your paper pattern right inside here and then close it on there, and then they'll just stay on there, and that will just mark your line for where you're stitching, so you can just highlight that one section. I've also seen people put them, let's do it on here, for example, they'll put them on like this, and you can see that I'm kind of highlighting just this area that I want to work on. So sometimes if you have a more complicated or larger pattern, you can use these to just kind of section off that one area that you want to work on, and that just helps get rid of all this other stuff visually, and it really helps you be able to see just that one spot. So these are totally optional. They're nice to have. I only use them on larger patterns. I think I may have used one on this pattern just so that I could kind of make sure that on my rows I was, you know, making sure I was doing the right thing. But these are totally optional, and they're really fun, and like I said, you could get these at Fat Quarter Shop. The other thing that you're going to need is some way to store your floss, and so I've got a couple different things. Of course, you can buy these you can get in like huge cases, and these are just little floss keepers, and you wind the floss around here, and then these little indents right here help you kind of tighten it off when you're done, so it'll just kind of hold it like that so it's not unraveling. And then you can put your used floss on this opening right here, and then that way you can tell which piece you're using, and then the pieces wrapped around are your new fresh floss. So these are super inexpensive, and you can, sorry, Jax is joining us, you can just buy these in a huge pack of them for really cheap. Another fun way to store your floss are these little floss flowers, and I only have 2 left because I've used all of them. These are from Fat Quarter Shop, and they also have a bunch of different shapes available on their website. The floss flowers are just kind of fun and cute, so I thought I would show you. One thing about the floss flowers, though, I've tried 3 different ways to store my floss on them, and I find that because they don't have this little indent like these do, the extra floss, there's nowhere to kind of tuck that in, and so it just kind of comes unraveled. So I don't particularly like, I've tried doing them this way, I've tried just wrapping them around, but as you can see, there's just nothing for the floss to hang onto, so they kind of come undone in my bag. So this is probably the best way I've found to keep the floss on the floss flowers. I just put a sticker on the back that says what the color is, and then I just wind up my floss and just tie it on here on the end, and I'll show you kind of how I do that, just so you can see it. I just loop it over my finger like this, and then you can just kind of shove that loop through, find the loop, and then just pull it through. And it's just super easy, and it just kind of keeps it on there. And then this actually stays pretty, it doesn't get really tangled or anything like that as long as you don't leave it too long. And then you can just throw these in your bag or your bucket. Here's an example of one where I have a piece that I'm actually using. So here's my unused floss, the thicker one, and then this thinner one right here is the piece that I'm actually pulling strands off of. And we'll talk about that in the next video. But that's just one other fun way to kind of store your floss. The other thing I do while I'm actually stitching, as far as storing my floss goes, is I keep one of these little design boards in my bag. This is just about, let's see, about 6.5 inches by 6.5 inches. And I just made this out of foam board, covered it in batting, and then hot glued some binding around the edge. And this is a tutorial on the Fat Quarter Shop website, so you can just find that. These are the Lori Holt design boards. It's super easy to make. And what I like about it is that it's sticky, so your floss kind of stays on it. So as I'm working, I'll just wrap this floss around my fingers, and then I'll just stick it here. And then that way I know I can pull from here if I need a color that's on my board. And then I actually just throw this in my bag, and it actually just stays in there. The floss stays on there. So super handy. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about floss. Oh my word. Okay, filming with Jax, you guys, is, yeah. I'm sorry, just bear with me. So let's talk about floss. So this floss right here is actually DMC Floss. This is what you can get at Michael's or, you know, Joann's, any of your kind of Walmart, any of your kind of regular craft stores. And this is a great floss to use. It's great for beginners. It's around, I think right now it runs about 50 to 58 cents per skein, so super cheap. You can buy a lot of different colors. You can even get them in large packs with a variety of different colors. And I kind of like doing that when starting off because it kind of gives you a variety of colors to work with, and it's really inexpensive. One thing to know, and I did not know this when I started, but when you get these, when you go to pull off a piece of your floss, you're going to pull from the side that has the numbers on it. So if you pull from this side, your floss will just pull out nicely, and you won't have any tangles or anything like that. And I usually pull out about 36 inches or so of floss, and then I'll cut it off right here. If you pull from this side that isn't the number side, and you try and pull, I don't know if you can see, but it's tangling up on this side and you won't be able to pull it out. So you'll know right away if you can get that side out. So pull from the side with the numbers. That's just a little beginner tip. And I'm just going to fold this up for right now. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But the DMC floss is a great floss to begin with, and it comes in a variety of colors, as you can see over here. This floss right here is Orifloss. It's made by Aurifil, which is my favorite sewing thread company, and this floss is also really nice. One of the really cool things about the Orifloss is that it comes on these little spools, and so when you pull it off to use it, you can pull off however much you want, and when you're done, you just wrap it right back up. Jax is a huge fan of floss, so please excuse us. And then you can kind of just tuck it right on that bottom, and then it stays, so it doesn't actually unravel at all. And then you can just throw this in a little, you know, basket or jar or something like that. I actually keep mine in these mason jars, and I have one for kind of the warmer tones and one for the cooler tones, and then I can just kind of dump them out and get what I need as I stitch. So this is really nice, and it's really easy to store. Now, as far as storing these go, there's a lot of different ways to do it. Fat Quarter Shop just came out with a really cool acrylic thing with drawers that you can put them in. For right now, don't freak out, I actually keep them all in just this giant jar, and it's just because I don't have a whole lot of floss yet. I think if I get a little bit more floss, I'll probably start sorting it by color. But for now, I'll actually just take my little floss flowers and I'll just kind of throw them in there, and then when I need a color, I can just kind of go through here and pick it out. Of course, you're going to want something a little bit better if you have more floss than I do, but when you're just starting, you're probably not going to have that much floss, and these glass containers have just worked really well for me because I can see in them, and they're easy to get to. This next packet right here is from Classic Colorworks, and just like everything with yarn and hand-dyed yarn, there are hand-dyed flosses, and so Classic Colorworks is just one example of the many hand-dyed flosses that you can get. They typically come like this, where they're kind of on a card, and it has the title of this or the color on it with a little skew on the back. And then one of the things with the hand-dyed flosses is that they're going to be a little bit variegated, so your color isn't going to be quite as solid as something like an Orifloss or a DMC. So let's see if I can find one where you can kind of see. Kind of probably going to be hard to see on camera, but some of the greens in here, you're going to have sections where it's going to be lighter and darker, and that's just the nature of being hand dyed. These are also, of course, going to be a little bit more expensive. So this is going to be anywhere from maybe $2 to $2.50 a skein. This says it's 5 yards. The DMC are, I think, like 8.5 yards, 8.6 7 yards. So obviously you're going to get a little bit more floss for your money than you are with these hand-dyed ones. However, a lot of people kind of prefer these because they feel like they stitch nicer and they like the variegation. So for example, in this little filled in area of my snow globe, if I had used a hand-dyed floss, you would see some variegation in there as far as you know, some darker and lighter sections of the blue. Since I use DMC on this, it's just all one solid color. So it's just something to consider when you're stitching. And you know, I kind of, sort of like with my quilting, I kind of like to just do whatever I want. I don't necessarily follow all of the rules. And so I would, if I wanted a variegated area, perhaps purchase a hand-dyed floss and use that for the variegated area. And then if I wanted a solid area, I would mix it with the DMC. And I don't think there's any rules against mixing floss like that. You may find that one is a little thicker or thinner than the other, so maybe just something to test out before you use it. I kind of go just with what color I like. I just pick the colors I like and I use that. So that's just kind of how I stitch. So I'm kind of breaking all the rules there. And then there's one other supply that I wanted to talk about, and that is an embroidery hoop. And this is totally personal preference in my opinion. I do not like stitching with embroidery hoops. I find it a lot harder. Some people find it easier, especially when they're starting, because it helps keep your fabric nice and taut while you're stitching. But personally, I don't like it, but I am going to show you how to use one. So obviously they come in a variety of sizes based on what size you need. And you just want to make sure that you have a hoop that is small enough to fit on your piece of fabric. And this one's actually kind of cutting it close on the sides here, but I usually try and have like maybe 2 inches all the way around at least when I'm using a hoop. And then to work it, you just unscrew this screw so that it comes apart. And you're gonna take this inside section and you're gonna place it underneath your fabric, just like that. And let's get these guys kind of out of the way. Get these guys out of the way. And so you have your fabric kind of centered on there, or whatever area you're working on, it needs to be centered on your hoop. And then you're just going to take this outer hoop and just kind of stretch it a little bit. And then you just want to stretch that top hoop and just press it on there nice and tight. And you just kind of want to make sure that your fabric is centered on your hoop. And obviously my fabric's just a little bit too small for this, so that's okay. And then you can kind of pull on your fabric too and just make sure everything's nice and tight. And that way you have a really nice kind of surface to work on when you're stitching. So some people do prefer to work right on a hoop like this. It just helps keep everything nice and straight and flat for them to stitch on. I personally like to use the sewing method, which I'll show you in the next videos, but that makes it almost impossible to use a hoop with. And in my opinion, the hoop, I like to just be able to hold it with my hand. So the hoop just starts kind of getting in my way. But you can do whichever one you prefer. Since the hoops are additional cost, I would go ahead and try stitching in hand first. If you don't like it, or if you find that your stitch tension is just really tight or off, then maybe go and get yourself a hoop and try and see if that kind of resolves that issue for you. But you're welcome to do whichever you prefer. It's totally personal preference. Okay, so I think that's basically it for all the supplies you're going to need. As you can see, there's sort of a variety of options, a variety of price points. Of course, you're going to need a pattern. And those can be a variety of price points as well, based on how detailed or how small or large the patterns are, and also probably from each designer one to the next. Okay, so this is basically kind of an overview of what you're going to need to get started. At the very basics, you're going to need some floss, some fabric, some scissors, and some needles, and that is it. Everything else that you see here are kind of some extra add-ons that I just sort of like to have. And then of course, one last thing I want to show you is a fun bag to store it all in. This is a free tutorial on my channel, so feel free to check that out. But there's a ton of, you don't have to use the vinyl, you can just do a solid fabric. There's a lot of different ways to make these, but it is kind of nice to have a bag that you can stick each project in. So I put one project per bag. It has the patterns, the fabric, and then all the little flosses. I usually throw a pair of scissors in here as well, and then I'm just ready to go, and I can just grab this bag and work on this project. All right, guys, that is it for our first video. Stay tuned next week for video number 2. We're going to be talking about how to actually do the different stitches. Hopefully it'll prepare you guys to participate in our 12 days of Stitchy Ornaments. I'll put a link on where you can get those below this video as well. And don't forget to download the free pattern that goes along with this series as well. So thank you so much for joining me for today's video. If you liked it, please make sure to thumbs up and subscribe. You can also hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of my upcoming videos. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I will see you next time.